Welcome to Buffalo Pregame, your source for live Buffalo football discussion, news, analysis, opinions, and more. Presented by ASM Publications and Bills Digest.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Buffalo Pregame. I am your host, Alex Brasky, here for Bills Digest and ASM Publications. On tonight's show, I'll be joined by special guest News 8 Sports Director Thad Brown out in Rochester, where Bills training camp is set to kick off on Wednesday morning as we have reached training camp eve here in Western New York and beyond, as everybody throughout the NFL fan sphere very excited for training camp to start around the NFL. And there's already news pouring out of One Bills Drive and St. John Fisher University. We'll get to that shortly. But each week on Buffalo Pregame, I'll provide updates on the NFL, NHL, and more via daily articles, podcast videos, and much, much more. Please subscribe to Buffalo Pregame with Alex Brasky on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, along with Buffalo Pregame with Alex Brasky on Substack, both of which are free of charge. All right, let's get into it. Bills veterans have now reported to training camp at St. John Fisher University. And like I said, the veterans reporting led to a bit of news being released by the team via the NFL transaction wire late this afternoon. Players headed to their dorm rooms, one of which was Dawson Knox. And if you look in photos taken by the Bills media team posted by Banged Up Bills on X, you can see that Dawson Knox is sporting a sleeve on his right leg, and that could be the reason why he was placed on the league's non-football injury list this afternoon, with two other players being placed on the PUP list, and those players being Spencer Brown and Cedric Van Pran Granger, two offensive linemen for the Bills. But let's touch on Dawson Knox's situation first. The non-football injury list, that means that his injury occurred away from the team. It doesn't necessarily mean that it came outside of football activities in terms of what he planned to do on his own this offseason. Perhaps he was catching passes at home in his backyard and tweaked a hamstring or tweaked a knee, or who knows at this point what it is for Dawson Knox. The nature of all three of these players' injuries still unknown, but it does mean that it happened away from the team. So it didn't happen at the team facility. He reports to camp, likely fails a physical, winds up on the non-football injury list. And similar to Landon Jackson this past week when he was placed on PUP, and like Brown and Cedric Van Pran Granger, he can be removed from the non-football injury list at any time. So this doesn't mean that he's going to enter the regular season on the non-football injury list and miss the first however many games of the season. This just means that he had an injury that popped up likely during a physical that forces them to place him on the non-football injury list, because it takes him out of participation likely of workouts or practices with the team, which are set to begin on Wednesday morning. It could also result from an illness. If it's an extreme illness and he's expected to miss extended time, players are placed on the non-football injury list due to illnesses. But like I said, seeing him in those photos and walking into Bills training camp with that sleeve on his right leg, that would lead you to believe that it is a lower body injury for Dawson Knox. But we are uncertain, and Sean McDermott will address the media before the team's first training camp practice tomorrow. So a lot of that will be cleared up, I'm sure, during that conversation with the media. All ears will be tuned in to that conversation between the Bills head coach and the media. The last time the Bills ran into a situation with the non-football injury list was 2023 with running back Nyheim Hines, who was injured while not participating in anything that could be deemed football-related activities, a jet ski accident resulted in a knee injury for Hines, and that kept him on the non-football injury list for the 2023 season. And then after the Bills released him in March of 2024, I believe he was with the Browns last year, but remained on that non-football injury list. He's since signed with the Chargers, but missed 2 years after being placed on the non-football injury list. Now, we didn't see him walking into camp with simply a sleeve on his leg, and Dawson Knox also was all packed up and ready to go for the week. So all signs point to this being something minimal, but the team did sign tight end Matt Sokol earlier on Tuesday, likely as insurance in case Knox is to miss extended time. You need a camp body at tight end. The Bills aren't loaded with tight ends on their roster, likely because the top of the roster and depth chart is pretty well decided at that position. But Matt Sokol joins the Bills, and he's played 8 games in his career, which began in 2020. He's 29 years old. I'm not sure he's going to factor into much with the Bills. Maybe this opens a back door for Zach Davidson to make the roster if Knox has this injury linger throughout training camp. Or perhaps more opportunity for Jackson Hawes. Jackson Hawes, throughout the offseason program, showing pass catching ability, particularly during rookie minicamp. And we all know about, well, all of us that have followed the draft, we all know about his blocking ability. He's supposed to be one of the best run blockers in the rookie class in terms of tight ends. So perhaps he already has opportunity with that 6th offensive lineman, that jumbo tight end, and now maybe more opportunity with Knox potentially missing some real time. But like I said, nothing to be panicked about quite yet. We'll hear from Sean McDermott tomorrow. He'll likely clear things up. Now, if Knox is to miss extended time, the Bills would not be obligated to pay him, although he would remain under contract. However, Buffalo could opt to continue to pay him as a sign of good faith, a player who's been with the organization for quite some time since he's been drafted, a leader in that locker room. So if this is a serious injury, they don't have to pay him, the Bills, but I would expect, at the very least in good faith, that the Bills would take care of his contract. At least work something out with him. I know there's been talk about a restructure already with Dawson Knox. He's making a base salary of $10.91 million this season and coming off a 2024 season in which he recorded just 22 receptions for 186 yards and 2 touchdowns. So I'm not sure he's worth the contract, but it is what it is at this point. And like I said, doesn't seem to be anything significant for Dawson Knox, but we'll keep an eye on it. We'll continue to monitor the situation with the Bills tight end. Moving on to the next 2 players that are injured, Spencer Brown and Cedric Van Pran Granger. Brown a little bit more consequential with his potential absence. He's dealt with back issues during his career. It's unknown the nature of his injury at this time, but he has been placed on the active PUP list, which, much like the NFL list, he could be removed from at any time. If he and Cedric Van Pran Granger, who is set to back up center Connor McGovern this year, Brown the starting right tackle, of course, if they are to remain on the PUP list entering the regular season, they would have to miss the first 4 games of the season. They would not count against the team's 53-man roster at that time. They do remain on the team's 90-man roster at this time, being on the active PUP list. And I believe the same is the case with Dawson Knox, if I'm not mistaken. But like I said, Van Pran Granger, a depth piece set to back up starting center Connor McGovern. People liked what they saw from him last year. I think he was a budding player in the Bills system. And then Spencer Brown, if he's to miss time, that would likely lead to Tylon Grable being inserted as the team's right tackle. He seemed to surpass Ryan Vandermark last season for that swing tackle role on the Bills roster. Cedric Van Prank Granger entering his second season in the league. But nothing that we know quite yet about the significance of these injuries, the nature, or what have you. We'll find more out when Sean McDermott meets the media. I would expect around 9 to 9:15 on Wednesday morning. There was also some good news to be had in terms of the injury front, as rookie Landon Jackson was removed from the PUP list as he has cleared his physical. He is good to go, as was first reported by Trainwreck Sports. Great report by them. Carson Hayek at MafiaCon. There's been some discussion about Trainwreck Sports reporting in recent hours. That was a good scoop. Great job by those guys. But the nature of Landon Jackson's injury, as far as I know, is still unknown. He had a neck injury late in his college career, but as far as I know, he was cleared from that. So, not sure what's going on with Landon Jackson, but whatever it is, it was insignificant, and he'll be ready to go for training camp, which starts on Wednesday. There was also some roster shuffling to be done. We mentioned Matt Sokol being signed. Wide receiver Kelly Akhtiari was released after a tough spring. Also, the Bills released punter Jake Camarda, who I had on my 53-man roster projection for Buffalo Pregame. I had him making the roster as the team's starting punter, but it looks like the Bills are set to go with Brad Robbins, the 26-year-old, 40.1 net average in 2023, really dismal. But Evan McPherson, the Bengals punter during that season, 19 of 19 on field goals inside the 50-yard line, with Robbins as the holder. So McPherson, the kicker, 19 of 19 on field goals inside 50 with Robbins as the holder. I think I may have just called McPherson the punter. It's tough listening to yourself talk sometimes. But who knows? Maybe Zach Davidson gets a chance at punter now. They need a tight end, and Zach Davidson, with some history in college or high school, I believe, is a punter. So maybe the Bills throw him a bone. But in a corresponding move to either the Sokol or Akhtiari, the Camarda or Akhtiari release, David White, a wide receiver that the Bills had liked dating back to last season, he was signed. He was with the Jaguars during his rookie season after going undrafted. He was injured his knee, missed the entirety of last season. Don't expect him to really factor into much. But the punter news is significant. The Puntapalooza officially canceled. Joe Buscaglia will be disappointed, I'm sure. But this doesn't close the door on the Bills potentially signing another punter late in the offseason. It was due to Matt Ariza being released when he was dealing with the off-the-field issues, but the Bills signed Sam Martin on August 31st, dating back a couple of years ago. So they are known to sign punters late in the game, and we'll see what happens there in terms of the Bills potentially canceling the Puntapalooza that was set to sweep the nation this summer at St. John Fisher University. And finally, as we discussed on an episode earlier today, we won't dig too much into it, but the Bills also announced the release of their red helmets. And we discussed that earlier today with Jeremy White of WGR 550. Go back and listen to that conversation on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. But certainly excitement spreading throughout the fan base. If you listen to that episode, maybe I'm not feeling the excitement, but I can relate, and I can enjoy other people's excitement just the same. But the Bills have announced they'll wear the 90s era red helmets with their current uniforms. They won't wear the entire 90s getup, just the helmets, during a Week 18 game against the Jets. They will wear the complete 1960s era throwback uniforms, including the jerseys and the helmets, in Week 6 against the Atlanta Falcons, who are also set to wear their red helmet throwbacks in that game, and 11 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Last time the Bills wore those standing Buffalo helmets with the all-white clean look, that last time was in 2020, so it's been quite some time, and they'll return to that a couple of times. One time for the 90s era, one complaint was it's Week 18. The Bills might have everything locked up. Josh Allen probably not going to play. Jeremy gets into that during the conversation. So with everything in Buffalo, there comes somewhat of a complaint, but you also get the 1960s era, which will make my father happy, and I'm sure your father's father happy as well. And it's a great time to be in the stadium this final year. They may have as many as 4 different helmets. They're going to look like the Oregon Ducks out there with a potential rivalry uniform coming as well. So that's going to do it for our preamble here. And we're going to have our guest come in a moment, and that's going to be Thad Brown of WROC Channel 8 in Rochester. There's a lot of hustle and bustle earlier this afternoon. I wasn't as locked in for this interview as I'd like to be. I didn't have really all my ducks in a row. I went from the early report today with the punter and Landon Jackson being removed from PUP, and then the red helmets were released on social media, and then later the Dawson Knox, Spencer Brown news. So it's been a busy day on the eve of training camp, and it's only going to pick up as the team is set to hit the practice field tomorrow. And let's talk with Thad Brown, sports director of WROC in Rochester, about training camp, what he's expecting out of a few position groups, but really we're going to set some expectations. I think Thad is a great resource for that, really dives into stuff around the league and spreads his knowledge a bit deeper than I have at this stage. So excited to hear from Thad and his input on this show, and really appreciate him taking the time. This is Thad Brown, sports director at WROC in Rochester. All right, here with Thad Brown, sports director, News 8, WROC in Rochester. It's that time of year, Thad, where things really start to get cranked up in Buffalo Bills country. And we got a little taste of it today with some minor news, but really what we're excited for, looking ahead to training camp in your neck of the woods. So very grateful for your time and to spend a few minutes with us here on Buffalo Pregame.
Sure. Going to be busy for us. I mean, it is still cool, even after 25 years, for my city. And I know some of that is me talking about the city I live in, but also just the people in Rochester. There's still a whole lot of pride for this town to host the Bills for 3 weeks. And yeah, it's only 10 practices or 11 practices, whatever it is, but it still matters to the people here. It still matters that the team feels that the setting at St. John Fisher and in Pittsford and in Rochester in general is still worthwhile enough to Sean McDermott and the team that they want to keep coming here. It matters. So, as always, even though it's year 25 or whatever, we are still very excited about it.
Yeah, and there's been some rumors that they're trying to work toward a long-term deal to stay in Rochester for the long haul. And that's somewhat surprising considering the new digs that they're setting up right across the street of the current stadium. And I think there was some thought that they'd go training camp kind of at home in Orchard Park in the future, but that certainly would be great for you, great for the people of Rochester, and really great for Bills fans, because heading out to Rochester, I think, is a great pilgrimage for anybody to make if they're not from the Rochester area. It's a great area to visit. The setting at training camp is perfect for a fan. It can be tough sometimes gaining position, jockeying for it along the fence, and there are some hot days in the stands. I think it's going to be 94 degrees this week, but the access with the players, if you're able to fit in and get some autographs, or at the very least get some interaction with them, you're able to see them from feet away, where typically you're hundreds of feet away in the stand. So it really offers a unique experience for the fan, and I'm interested to see if they can build kind of toward that long-term deal that I think would be, like I said, great for everybody involved. But the reason why we bring in is to briefly discuss what we've been hammering home the past several weeks, which is the Bills roster construction and what we're looking forward to in terms of storylines, and then also set some expectations here. But we start with the first half of that conversation, and I want to ask kind of the opposite of the question that I asked Jeremy White earlier on an impromptu show that was really kind of branched off the red helmet announcement. And I asked him which Bills position group inspires the most confident, which is he the most sure about entering the season, and kind of what players have the most to gain entering training camp is really what I asked him. And what I want to ask you is, who has the most to lose at training camp? There's so many players that are looking to elevate their position or cement their status at a given position. There's a few names that stick out obvious who can do themselves a disservice with a disappointing performance at training camp over the next several weeks, and maybe play themselves either out of a job or not play themselves into a job like they need to.
I think I start with defensive line. There are so many bodies there now with the 3 draft picks, the 3 guys signed in free agency. Now, obviously, Michael Hoyt and Larry Ogunjobi can't play for the first 6 weeks. So this conversation won't end where the rest of the positions and really the rest of the league will with the end of August. This conversation probably goes on until deep into October, until those 2 guys come back. But if you look at someone like AJ Epinesa, he might be fighting for a long-term job this year. Javon Solomon is a guy who probably needs to have a good camp to stick on the roster again, past those 2 suspensions. So just the logjam of bodies, to me, makes defensive line probably number 1 with a bullet for this conversation. I think safety is another spot for it too. I don't know about playing a guy off a roster. The Bills only have 4 safeties on the roster right now, 4 true safeties in, Cole Bishop and Taylor Rapp and DeMar Hamlin, Derek Forrest. I think there's an excellent chance those are the 4 guys who are the 4 safeties on the roster who, have roster spots. But in terms of who starts, I think most of us expect this to be Cole Bishop's job almost to lose. So again, you don't talk about someone who has a lot to lose in this camp. Cole Bishop is front and center there, because this is a spot that, or a job that I think many of the Bills coaches want to see, and many of the Bills in the front office too want to see him win. And, this is a guy, in my opinion, who's one of the 2 or 3 that I am most fascinated to watch in camp. What can Bishop do? Because last year, he gets hurt in training camp, and the expression around the league is kind of the train left without you. That's what it felt like, that there was a whole season that Bishop wasn't ready to play because he lost that big chunk of training camp. So now what happens when we assumably, because Bishop had some injury issues, back in the spring this year, assumably see a whole training camp from him, what does that do for his ability, his comfortability with the defense going forward? And I think the third one that came up when you brought this up to me would be wide receiver. And I don't know about spots to lose, but you've got Terrell Shavers, you've got Elijah Moore. I don't know if the Bills can keep more than 5 receivers. Perhaps even Gaither, the guy they just drafted this year.
Jalen Virgil with a nice offseason as well.
You know what? That's not a terrible name to throw out there either. Might be 4 guys for 1 job. So more of a position battle discussion as opposed to something to lose. But I think there are opportunities at receiver beyond Keon and Khalil Shakir and Curtis Samuel and that group that, you have things that could be lost, because there's a chance to gain a position there for those other 3 or 4 guys we talked about.
Yeah, I think before the news today, you might have thrown punter into that conversation, but Jake Camarda obviously jettisoned to the waiver wire now.
But to your point there, Alex, Brad Robbins, yeah. I can't imagine this is a guy that's locked in. If he doesn't have a great camp, the Bills all of a sudden go around and look at the other 15 or 20 teams that have got 2 punters in and try and pick the best of that group. I mean, that they really are not seemingly in a great shape at punter. Not that for this team it matters much, but it is a spot where Brad Robbins, I think, has to now have a camp to keep that job.
I think they're more concerned with the dynamic maybe between the punter / holder and Tyler Bass than anything in this situation. And I was following Uber Hansen, I think, on Twitter, and he posted a stat that during Brad Robbins' stint as a starting punter / holder, the team he was with, I think Cincinnati it was, the team was perfect from inside 50 yards during his stint as a holder. So we'll see what he has to offer during training camp. But I think another one I'd throw into that bucket with something to lose. And you bring up a good point about Ogunjobi being out for the first 6 weeks. And I don't think he has anything to lose in training camp in terms of being cut before the season. But if Daquan Jones doesn't show that he rebounds, and I've discussed this on a previous show, they might work him out of that rotation come week 6 when Ogunjobi comes back. You have so many players there that you spend offseason capital on, whether it be in the draft or through free agency. Daquan Jones is going to have to hold down his position, not to mention Dwayne Carter, who could be nipping at his heels. So there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen in that defensive line room, and it could work to Daquan Jones's disadvantage here as we go. But as we're entering training camp, obviously the defensive side of the ball is gaining so much of the attention, but I'm still focused on this James Cook situation. I'm intrigued how it's going to play out. You never know how these contractual negotiations go on behind closed doors, and what is a show of good faith? What does the player mean when he steps to the podium? So I'm sure that the negotiations are ongoing. At what level, I'm not sure, but I'm sure that the team and Cook would like to reach a middle ground before the outset of the season. So this isn't a lingering conversation no matter what happens. If James Cook has a great year, takes a step back this year. So I'm sure they're looking to put this behind them and work towards something. But whether or not that's going to get done during training camp or before the regular season, who knows? How do you think that this is all resolved before week 1? Is there any resolution, or is it just kind of how it is and they're going to play it out with the uncertainty throughout the course of the season?
My gut right now, in terms of the contract, is that James Cook's going to have to play in the last year of his rookie deal. I just feel like, and this is not being inside the room, it's just kind of a read of what James Cook seems to believe his value is, what I think his reasonable value is, and maybe what the team can afford. It doesn't feel like those numbers are close enough to where there will be a deal struck anytime soon or during the season. I think he goes to, I don't know if he goes to free agency, but I think he makes it to next offseason without a contract. I could be wrong. Brandon Beane has been very good about coming up with extensions, finding numbers that work. As for training camp, though, the way James Cook approached minicamp, to me, makes me feel optimistic that he's going to be a good soldier. He's going to come out and practice. He's going to work. And, whether I don't think there's going to be a hold in. I think he's going to play. And I do also think the Bills can help this out. I was looking back at what Dalvin Cook did when he was in the same spot, figuring that they're in the same family. There's a good chance James Cook might approach it the same way. And Dalvin Cook going into the last year of his rookie deal, granted, he had better numbers than James Cook did. So he had a little more reason maybe to, cause a problem if you want to look at it that way. He said during the offseason that he might hold out, he might cause a problem, but he came to training camp and he participated. And he was not someone who did the hold in thing. He was there practicing and being a part of the team. What the Vikings did also, though, is they kind of sat him during practice. They didn't push him. Yeah. It was almost like a, understanding that, hey, we appreciate you're here. We know you want a new deal. We know you don't want to risk anything. Let us help you help yourself. And I wonder if the Bills, being the type of organization that seems to be very cognizant of what, players want, trying to, I wouldn't say a player's team or a player's organization, but they generally do the right thing. James Cook is a guy that doesn't need to practice. He's in year 4 as a running back. It's virtually the same offense. There's no reason to run him out there and have to, give him 50 or 70% of the snaps. There's not much that he, I would think, needs the prep at this time. Whereas you can give a guy like Ray Davis or Frank Gore Jr. a little more reps. You get a benefit there. I think there's a middle ground where James Cook can be a full participant officially, not be run into the ground in training camp, feel like the team is negotiating and treating him in good faith, and perhaps that helps those two sides come together and find a number that both can agree on going forward. So my gut is that James Cook is going to participate. He's not going to hold in, but I have doubts about whether or not the Bills and Cook can actually come to an agreement before the season starts.
Yeah, playing this season under a $5 million contract in search of $15 million or more. You're right. I'm just not so sure the middle ground is somewhere where they're close to reaching at this point. And you heard Brandon Beane, dating back to the owners' meetings, really kind of stall the negotiations and take care of some other business with the Greg Rousseaus and Christian Benford, Khalil Shakir. So now moving forward, it'll be interesting whether or not there's kind of his feet held to the fire. If there's anything that James Cook does, whether it's behind closed doors or not, like you're saying, if he tries to urge them into kind of a pitch count situation as a sign of good faith that way, or whatever you're going to do during training camp, it'll be interesting to see how that all works out. Now, I also wanted to shift this conversation toward setting some expectations here for the Bills. And I began this topic with Jeremy talking about the division and how close the Patriots are to overtaking the Miami Dolphins. And what I want to ask you is more of a Dolphin-centric question. Does Tyreek Hill have anything left in the tank? Because that offense is the fuel that fuels that entire engine there in Miami. You see them come playoff time when they need to buckle down and they're not able to do it. They have that high-flying offense that they rely on, 70 points, this, that, and the other thing. But they need Tyreek Hill and the connection between him and Tua to really elevate that offense to its full efficacy. In your mind, was last year a bump in the road for him? Tua misses 4 weeks. They're never really truly able to regain that connection. Even when he came back, it was about 60 yards per game. The down the field really wasn't there for those two, really relied on that short passing game. So taking everything into account, including his age, where there was only 2 players in the league over 30 years old who went for over 1,000 yards last year. So taking that into account and what you saw from him and Tua last year, is there anything left in the tank for Tyreek? And are the Dolphins really falling off a cliff here, or can they settle things if they're able to remain healthy?
Kind of 3 different questions here. I think first, does Tyreek have anything left? I think he does. And I think you have to couch this discussion in Tyreek at 100% in his prime was one of the more ridiculous weapons we've ever seen. As long as he doesn't fall off a cliff, which is certainly possible, to your point about the way receivers age, we almost saw it, I think, a little bit with Amari Cooper last year. You can lose it fast at that position. But I think Tyreek Hill was coming from such a high spot, such an elite level, that even if he's 15, 20% worse this year, that's still a really effective receiver and a really dangerous guy. And that's kind of where I think he's at. I think he's on the back end, descending down the mountain, but still has a whole lot to give. The part about the Dolphins not being able to go down the field, I think, was more of defenses scheming up, dropping back. I mean, the game the Bills played last year in Miami, they pretty much just took their 2 safeties, sat them back 30 yards and said, you got to go 10 or 15 chunks at a time to get down the field against us. And the Dolphins couldn't do it without shooting themselves in the foot. Miami's got to clean that part of the game up, forcing teams to respect the underneath stuff more, in my opinion. And that may theoretically open up the deep ball again. So it's not about the receivers having problems. To me, it was more of the scheme. Now, the Dolphins as a whole, though, I'm not a huge fan of this team. I mean, the secondary is despicably bad.
Terrible.
The offensive line is better, but they're coming from such a low spot. I'm not overly fired up there. Now, look, if you can get the edge guys back to where they were theoretically when they were healthy, I think you've got, with Phillips and Bradley Chubb or whatever, you've got potentially a really good duo there that can be dangerous. But you got to hope that they're fully healthy after a couple of years of really dealing with all kinds of stuff. I don't know if the Dolphins are the second best team. I look at really Miami and New England, and maybe the Jets are a half a notch below, as 3 teams that could all win between 6 and 9 games. They'll be a pain in the neck, but none of the 3 of them are really a threat to the Bills, certainly at the top of the division, let alone even for a wild card. Although the AFC East has such a soft schedule this year, it wouldn't surprise me that Miami or New England falls into 10 wins and make a wild card that way.
Yeah, we were talking with Jeremy earlier, and he went through the contrasting non-conference games, I believe, and the Bills play the Eagles, the Patriots play the Giants. So the first place schedule in terms of that could make things very, very, or third place schedule in terms of the Patriots, and otherwise could make things a little bit more simpler for them. How about more grand scope in terms of the conference? We saw ESPN come out with its top rosters in football. Bills were rated ahead of the Chiefs by 1 spot. Baltimore was the top roster. Where do you see it in terms of the pecking order in the conference? Is it Bills, Chiefs, Ravens, and everybody else? Are the Bengals coming? I know that they have that drama with their 2 defenders, Trey Hendrickson, Shamar Stewart, both, I don't think, at training camp. So do you see it as those top 3 in the pecking order, or is there somebody coming from behind? Maybe the Texans are rebound season, somebody in that rearview mirror that could come up and disrupt that top 3?
I think the top 3 is pretty solid, but I think that second group feels more dangerous, and there are more teams that are more dangerous in that second group than I can remember in this conference in a long time. Cincinnati is certainly there. We know what the offense can do. Whatever headaches they have on defense, they can still win games 40-37 if they have to. So that makes the Bengals a live problem always, no matter what their defense is doing. On top of that, I agree, Houston, you can't discount them. The offensive line went in such a bad spot last year that I don't feel like that's something you can fix in 1 year. But C.J. Stroud is still very good. The defense is excellent. They're probably, like the Bills, going to have a red carpet ride to a division title, so they'll be a problem. And then the AFC West, the Chargers with Harbaugh and Justin Herbert still legit. I think they're building it slowly the right way. The Chargers this year, after making the playoffs a little bit unexpectedly, didn't kind of do what Houston did last year and make the big splash, grab a Stephon Diggs type weapon. They're still kind of building it the slower way. And I think that makes them more dangerous long-term than this year, but you still can't overlook them. And then there's Denver. I'm not a huge Bo Nix fan, but if he takes a step up, let's say he's like even in the Geno Smith level, because I thought last year he was the kind of like functional rookie quarterback, won't kill you, but can't do a whole lot on his own. If he takes a step forward, the rest of the roster is ridiculous. And that makes them very much a player. I've listened to some people talk about the Chiefs not even making the playoffs this year, and not even an assessment of the Chiefs as a roster because of what the Chargers and Denver, and even to a lesser extent, the Raiders have done this offseason. I think it's a very legitimate, even if still unlikely, conversation. So, yeah, the Bills and the Ravens and the Chiefs are still the top three. And I think that, to be honest, I think the Bills and the Ravens, as much as I feel like this is something that I'll put on, record now and regret later, I think the Bills and Ravens are a solid half notch above the Chiefs right now when you look at roster construction. For the Ravens, it's all about Derrick Henry. If that guy continues to still defy father time and just run the ball like he's constantly 25, then the Ravens are the number one problem in the conference. And the Chiefs are a little bit of a step back because I still can't trust their offensive line. And I think their defense isn't going to be quite as good as it has been the last year and a half or so. With the Bills, in my opinion, really close to the Ravens, and again, a half notch or so in front of Kansas City.
Yeah, for the Chiefs, I think it's really, and for the Broncos, as a matter of fact, I think it's really going to come down to the wide receiver position. For the Chiefs, the health of Rashee Rice and Hollywood Brown after they exited scene left last year, things really took a dive for the Chiefs offense. And with Travis Kelce aging the way he is, he could be out the door after this season. They really need those two receivers to come in and be that 1-2 punch that they wanted them to be last year. And then you look at Denver, the one thing that could hold them back is their offensive weaponry. I'm not so sure that they're as loaded as they'd like to be, especially at the wide receiver position. You're going to have Marvin Mims, and I think I've mentioned this previously, take a significant jump for them and maybe become more of a focal point to that offense in order to unlock the full efficacy of Bo Nix, to use that word again. But yeah, I see it similar to you. I really like what the Ravens have done this offseason, bringing in DeAndre Hopkins, bringing in Jair Alexander, and some of these players that they're just bolstering both sides of the ball. They were already a phenomenal team, but they obviously need something to get them over the edge. They haven't been able to the past few years, similar to the Bills. And I really like the free agent additions that they've made. And you bring back Derrick Henry. He's shown no signs of slowing down. And obviously Lamar Jackson, another MVP caliber season. And I think John Harbaugh is one of the most underrated coaches in the NFL. He's similar to Sean McDermott. He's been around forever, and he's kind of wore out his welcome with some Ravens fans, but I think they're lucky to have him, and any other team would jump at the opportunity to have him as their head coach. So I honestly see it on paper, the Ravens roster-wise, a little bit ahead of the Bills just due to that star power that they have aside from the quarterback position. For the Bills, they just don't have that. Josh Allen, James Cook, you really can't name anymore. So
right. The thing for me, Alex, with the Ravens is I just don't know when the year comes that Derrick Henry finally is not effective. And
right.
And if you think about Derrick Henry having a Priest Holmes at the back end year or a season where you just look at it and say, wow, he just doesn't have it. It really changes a lot of how you view that offense. They'd still be pretty good because Lamar Jackson, like Josh Allen, is at that level. And the offensive line is always going to be fantastic. But Derrick Henry is the linchpin, the bonus factor that really makes Baltimore a scary, scary team. If he's still what he was last year, I'm with you. I think I would think Baltimore is the best team in the conference and would be my pick to go to the Super Bowl, as much as I don't want to pick the team that constantly proves they can't figure it out in the playoffs. Right. But it's all about Derrick Henry.
Yeah, for sure. And that's a similar conversation to we previously had with Tyreek Hill, two players that are so critical to what both of those teams do offensively. But Thad, we kept you a couple minutes extra, and I appreciate the time. Bills kickoff live now. We had Josh on the other day. He was able to unveil the new branding for the show. It's become, you said the word, a linchpin in Bills fans' game day activities. And tell us about new branding and what you guys have going on over there at Bill Kickoff Live.
Yeah, we appreciate that. Yeah, having the opportunity to use the nickname now, just, I think furthers the relationship and the partnership that we have with the Bills. Both of the stations, WROC in Rochester, WIVB in Buffalo, are official partner stations with the Bills, where you can see the preseason games for the most part. So, we appreciate being able to take that step. And it's been a fun show. We've been doing this since Sean McDermott took over. It's myself, it's Josh Reed, Sal Capaccio's on, Matt Perino, so many, good members of the media, smart guys. And the thing I've always liked about this show, everybody, Tim Graham too, can't leave out Tim Graham. He'll tell me about it if I leave Tim Graham out. So can't do that. Everybody comes at this from a point of view of just absolutely being uber prepared, in a little bit different way too. I think, Matt's a little more of the there every day kind of beat writer kind of thing. Tim Graham has such the historical perspective. Sal Capaccio, absolutely, meat and potatoes detail guy. I'm more of a, pour over the all 22 film guy. So, we all kind of come at it from a little different angle, but we all, spend so many hours to make sure we are absolutely 1,000% prepared for what we're going to talk about, what we want to, point to in terms of important things that are, surrounding the Bills as they head into whatever game we're going to play that week. That's the thing I enjoy most about the show. And, I'm appreciate all the nice things you say, and, encourage everybody to check it out there as we head into the new era of Bills Kickoff Live this season.
New era with the new helmets and all the good stuff that the team's putting on for this farewell season at Highmark Stadium. Be sure to tune in to Bills Kickoff Live. And Thad, thank you for joining us here on the show. Appreciate your time, my friend.
Sure, man. Thanks for having me.
All right. Big thanks to Thad Brown of WROC, Channel 8, sports director out there, Bills Kickoff Live. Ton of great stuff from he and the crew. For years, Thad has been a phenomenal resource on the beat to follow. Great updates from practice, in-depth analysis, and to bring it to the show. Very grateful for Thad's time. And I bring up Del Reed, my man at 26 Shirts, has hooked me up with a training camp ticket for Wednesday, so I'll be out there with the fans in the stands. Be sure to say hello if you see me out there. I'll be getting my training camp tan and taking in the action as the Bills hit the practice field for the first time in quite some time. And I can't tell you enough how grateful I am to Del as this year for Bills Digest, as I've moved on from the Batavia Daily News, Bills Digest not being offered a credential for training camp. So had to find some other means, and Del, as he always does, came in very, very clutch. He also was gracious enough to have me at MafiaCon for the second straight year. And Del, obviously a big member of Bills Mafia, one of the most recognizable fans amongst the fan base, and does great things with 26 Shirts with his guys Josh and Andrew and the whole crew over there. Just great stuff from Del, and very appreciative and looking forward to getting out there tomorrow. But let's close with this, as we close with kind of an expectation setting conversation with Thad Brown. And I just want to caution Bills fans. I know that or caution Bills fans, I should say. I know that a lot of them have high expectations entering this season, a lot of them considering it close to Super Bowl or bust like it was before the reset last year. How quick that reset came. But I want to caution Bills fans, it might not go as smooth as you think. There are a lot of holes on this team. That being said, underlying holes, and I've mentioned the lack of star power as well. This team isn't beyond stumbling out of the gate with a tough game against the Ravens and then working into that easy part of the schedule and just tripping up here or there. This team is not beyond that. They haven't proven yet, I should say, to be a generational team. Now, maybe come week 5, week 6, we say, oh, we got something cooking here. But as of right now, I just think that you have to take a step back. You have to look at the AFC. You have the Chiefs. They're going to be there every year. But the Ravens, like we mentioned with Thad, I'm really interested to see this iteration of the Ravens and how good they can be. It really does all come down to Derrick Henry, like Thad said, and if he can stay healthy. But, boy, if he can stay healthy and remain effective as he has, this team could be scary good. And then you look at that AFC West with the Denver Broncos, with the Los Angeles Chargers, two tough teams that could be on the rise. You saw Mike Williams retire. As I have sirens behind me. I live in downtown Batavia, so if you heard that, I don't want you to think I live in a rough area. It's just, this is what happens when you're city living. But you look at the Chargers and the Broncos. If the Broncos can get something out of their wide receiver group, I think Bo Nix is good enough with that defense. Boy, that defense. So it's going to be interesting to see, and I think there's a long way to go with this schedule. This team's certainly built to win a Super Bowl, but they're going to have to prove it over the first several weeks of the season and going into December and January. And I'm excited to see it all get underway as we follow the reports and people come in and out of the lineup. War of attrition, this, that, and the other. And finally, I think the team that I'm looking at in the AFC, the Pittsburgh Steelers. A lot of people not taking them seriously based on how things went with Aaron Rodgers and the Jets, but I think this is a much more stable organization. They brought in so much firepower around them. They left no stone unturned with the re-signing of TJ Watt. And I'm a Mike Tomlin guy through and through. I'm a coach guy. You know that if you've ever followed a word that I've posted on X. And yes, Bob, if all goes well with the ticket, I'm able to transfer it over. I should be out there tomorrow bringing you some stuff from training camp. You're right, Bob. Ravens do have a challenging schedule, but I think they're the better team in all three of those matchups. Rams are kind of doing a soft little reset there. Now here come the fire trucks, by the way. Hope everyone's okay. That's what I always get concerned with. I just hope everyone is okay. But I mean, you look at the Bills' schedule and you look at that home slate, that's going to be a tough road. So, as simple as the Bills' schedule seems, there are some tougher matchups later in the year. I think they really need to get off to a good start, go into the winter months with a head full of steam, and hopefully healthy at that point, and then see what happens down the stretch. But don't get ahead of yourself, Bills fans, and just wait for things to play out. But once again, I'd like to thank Thad for joining me here on Buffalo Pregame. Great conversation with him. You heard about all the updates at the top of the show. Boy, it must be serious. Must be very, very serious. Concerned. You heard the updates at the top. Dawson Knox, non-football injury list. Spencer Brown, and Cedric Van Pran Granger placed on the active PUP list. Landon Jackson removed from PUP. Jake Camarda, the punter, released. Brad Robbins seems to have won that job. You sign a wide receiver, David White, release wide receiver Kelly Akhtiari. And obviously earlier today, the Bills bring back the red helmets as well. So if you'd like to recap, go back and listen to the beginning of this episode. If not, you can also listen about the red helmets. We touched on that with Jeremy White from WGR earlier today. So please like, share, and subscribe this podcast. Be very grateful if you did so. That's a big help to me here at Buffalo Pregame. And also spread the word of our YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts. So thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.